Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again for another great conversation for our PRI Young Leaders Circle speaker series. So as many of you know, we talk to experts and interesting folks from think tanks in government, public policy, and emerging industries. Talk about their career, talk about free market topics, interesting work they're doing. Today we have Hannah Cox. Hannah's with the Foundation for Economic Education, something we can talk about. She just moved to. So Hannah, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's maybe let's go into your recent move. Talk about you were just hired, I think, this week, and talk about maybe some of the work you did, and then your move over. I think I saw you had an interesting career change a while ago. So maybe take us through how you ended up at FE.
Sure. Well, I'm really excited to be full-time at FEE now. I've been working with them in a part-time capacity for a number of months as a fellow initially, but I've had a long history with the Foundation for Economic Education. Back probably almost 10 years ago, I graduated college. I was working in the music industry. That was the field I had gone to school for and where all of my contacts were. And I was just quite miserable. I really didn't like it at the end of the day. And I was looking for a way out. I was thinking about going to law school. I was thinking about going to work in mental health care. Those were both things I cared a lot about. And I actually sort of stumbled into politics, looking to work on the side while I was still in music. And I started working for an attorney who ran a Second Amendment group in town. And I just thought, well, this is a good way to see if I like the practice of law. And I do like the Second Amendment. So why not, and I can do it on the side. And I really fell in love with public policy. But I also had this sort of awakening during that year of it was kind of an identity crisis. I'd grown up very traditional conservative Republican. My dad's a Southern Baptist minister. But as I was going around Tennessee and speaking to these different Tea Party groups and Republican clubs about the Second Amendment, I was just hearing a lot of things that didn't resonate with me, that I didn't think were limited government, individual liberty stances. And I thought, is this where I fit? Maybe I need to go back to the drawing board. And so it was during that time that I really started to trying to figure out what I believed, why I believed it, and what my principles were. And it was through that I actually stumbled onto FEE. And I read a lot of content at fee.org, got very much into the School of Free Market Economics. And so it was really fundamental for my development and helping me figure out my worldview. I went on to continue working sort of on the side in politics for about 2.5 years while still working in music. And then I made the jump into politics full time in 2016. So I initially worked for the Beacon Center of Tennessee, which is a free market think tank. And then for the past almost 3 years, I've been running Conservatives Concerned about the death penalty at the national level. And we've had some really great successes there. We actually saw 3 more states overturn the death penalty during that time. And then, as we mentioned, I just moved over to FEE full time this week. So I'm now going to be working as the content manager and brand ambassador. And I'm just so excited to get to help other people encounter the incredible work that FEE puts out, and to also contribute myself as a writer and a commentator to help ensure that these ideas get in front of more people.
That's great. We've had Carrie McDonald on several times for panels and interviews. I like that you said you went through a lot of FEE's content, because I feel like FEE puts out a great deal of content that is very good. It is not it's not just quality or quantity. They do a bit of both. So I know I always try to check when their articles come through, or a newsletter, because it's very relevant on the different topics. What were you doing specifically in the music industry?
Well, I had been in for 3 years during college and 5 years out. So I did a great deal. In college, I ran an organization that staffed major music industry events. So I was coordinating red carpets, award show events, and overseeing our staff throughout that process. I interned for Big Machine Records and then for Taylor Swift's management. I did some internships in publishing for Cobalt and Big Loud Shirt. And then when I graduated college, I went to work for Entertainment One, which is a global company that does all kinds of entertainment, TV, film, and music. And I did events for them for a period of time, and then was their director of music licensing in Nashville. So I was placing songs in TV shows and films. So I wore a lot of hats, and I was a performer
Yeah.
throughout college as well, and a songwriter. So I kind of did just about everything but artist management. And I never worked on the agency side, but I kind of checked all the other boxes.
No, I mean, that's interesting. We've had other guests on talk about similar work they've done and how it fits into public policy or politics. I don't think we've had anyone from the music industry, but it's a very similar type of work when you switch over of advocacy, content, placing songs versus placing your articles or something like that. So that's interesting to hear. Take us through some of your maybe your recent work with Fee. You've written a little bit about the ProAct, some criminal justice reforms. Maybe take us through your kind of greatest hits that you've had so far.
Sure. Well, it's definitely been a news week for criminal justice reform issues. And as you can imagine from my past work in criminal justice reform, I remain very passionate about these issues. And while there were many, I guess, more headline grabbing events around the Derek Chauvin trial verdict and then around the shooting in Columbus, there was another viral video that actually took off this week out of New Jersey. That was a group of teenagers who were riding their bikes throughout the street. It's about a 20-minute video, and watching it, I was just reminded so much of my younger brothers who loved BMX and biking. And, it's just a group of kids, they're popping wheelies, they're kind of doing jumps off different stairs. And at some point, the cops start pursuing them, and they kind of get crowded into this cul-de-sac and confronted by police, who first tell them, we're not going to take your bikes. We're not going to take your bikes. We just want to talk to you. But then they come back and they do demand that they get off their bikes and say that they don't have a license to be riding their bikes, which is apparently something this town passed, really stupid law that the town passed. And they basically confiscate their bikes. They ended up putting one kid in handcuffs and taking him to the station, where he was pretty quickly released just because he was talking back, essentially saying, like, why are you doing this? This is my bike. I mean, nothing more than what I would do in that situation, right? And so I wanted to elevate that case. The video took off, it had over 5 million views on Twitter. And I think it's a really great example of the underlying problems with policing in this country. There's a lot of talk around policing. There's a lot of organizations working on policing reform. But in my opinion, and having worked very closely to the criminal justice reform movement, a lot of them vastly missed the mark on the key thing that we need to do to actually address police brutality, reduce extrajudicial killings in this country, and that is to limit the size and the scope of the government. And instead, we see a lot of these groups actually pushing for very big government responses to this issue. And I thought that was a good example because, there's a couple things said in the video. One, the cops say throughout it, this is a waste of our time. This isn't what we want to be doing. But yet they are exercising their choice and enforcing it. Cops have great power over which laws they enforce and where they spend their time. So that's false. They also say in the video, we don't make the laws, we just have to enforce it. Well, as somebody who spends a great deal of time around state capitals, I can promise you they very much do make the laws. They spend a lot of time and taxpayer dollars lobbying to make the laws and public policy that they want in this country. And we see that the results of that are problematic in many folds. Every time you have a police member encounter a member of the general public, there is a chance that violence can ensue. We've seen some of these encounters over very petty things, like Eric Garner selling loose cigarettes in New York, or more recently, Dante Wright being pulled over for, it seems, either expired tags or air freshener. Escalate and become something that ends with somebody losing their life. At other times, it can put police officers in danger. And so really the only way to meaningfully address that is to limit the reasons and the number of times that police will be interacting with citizens in this way.
Well, and can we also just bring up what bizarre law or ordinance requires a license to ride a bike? I don't know if I've ever heard of that. I don't even know what that means. Imagine my daughter, who's young, she can ride a bike, needing a license to ride around our neighborhood. I don't know. I find it fascinating, I guess. But
my reading of the law was that it's more they want people to license their bikes. So register them essentially with the state in that capacity, more so than a driver's license. Either way, it's a governmental hoop they want children to jump through in order to ride their bikes. It's stupid. And that's the point. Many of our laws are stupid and they shouldn't be there, and they pose risk to the public and to police, and they don't in any way meaningfully make our community safer. And this town where this occurred is a great example of that. You have cops out here chasing kids around taking their bikes, leaving them to walk through the streets, which is dangerous for the children, just to go get their bikes out of headquarters and get them back. Meanwhile, the county or the city has, they rank in the bottom half of public safety across the country, and they have their clearance rates that I pulled from 2019 were abysmal. You had like 28% of rapes that had been cleared, less than 30% of property crimes that have been cleared. Like, go solve crimes, go do your actual job to make communities safer and quit harassing the public. But the problem does stem back to the bad laws that are being put in place, which I don't think police get to wash their hands of and say, we didn't make the law. They are involved in that process too, but ultimately politicians need to be held accountable in this equation, because they are putting really bad laws on the books that get people killed.
Well, speaking of really bad laws on the books, do we want to talk a little bit about the ProAct?
I would love to talk about the ProAct. I'm pretty hot under the collar about the ProAct. As I just detailed in my own progression in my career, contract work and side work was very important to my trajectory. And had it not been for those opportunities, the choices in front of me would have been far fewer and far more costly. I probably would have had to go back to school to get another degree to get out of music. That would have been very expensive. That would have been time consuming. That would have been time away from work, more student debt. And then even then, coming back out, do you actually get a job in the career that you go to school for? For a lot of people, it's no. So, being able to not go that pathway and instead just start doing the work, just start networking, just start building my resume, just start getting experience. That was huge. It also gave me an opportunity to start making extra money on the side. I don't think most people know this, but the music industry does not pay well. I think a lot of people have this idea that it's a very glitzy industry. It's not. It's been gutted. They've really never figured out how to rebuild post streaming, and so those aren't good paying jobs. So for me, being able to make additional money on the side as I was trying to transition careers was also very important, to just being able to pay my bills, pay off debt, start saving, basic things as a single young woman. The ProAct will essentially take that opportunity away from people like me, and there's about 45 million to 50 million people who participate in the gig economy. Some of those do so full-time, others do it like I did on the side. But either way, this would impact a lot of people's livelihoods. And we know that a large percentage of those people are women, who often choose these kinds of roles because they need more flexibility in their schedules.
Why? And I'm thinking of California. I know other states have passed or tried to ban similar gig economy bills, and a lot of it's tied. There's this obsession with Uber and Lyft and DoorDash, and these, they're obsessed with these people are taken advantage of, and to a point, I believe some are. I also think to a point, no one should be relying on that for a career, because it's like a minimum wage job. You're probably not going to have a career making minimum wage, or you shouldn't. What do you think the obsession is behind? I mean, you hit it, of people earning extra money, people not having to go back to school, and gosh, talk about student loan debt and another epidemic that's impacted younger generations. Why do you think obsessed with? A lot of it's tied to unions, but a lot of it's like they kind of just ban gig work, and it's a fascinating thing. Of you'd think they'd want to flourish it more, they'd want to protect that type of work. It's the ultimate free market expression. And again, I think of AB 5, which when it was passed in California, they had to pass, I don't know if it was hundreds, but a lot of exemptions, because kids refereeing, umpires, musicians, journalists couldn't write over this arbitrary amount of articles a year. It was a bizarre list. And I just wonder, from what you've seen, is there anything to the ProAct would maybe make that national? I just wonder, what's the push to do this when you're probably taking money away from people?
Yeah, I think it absolutely comes from special interests. There's no question. It's a very paternalistic solution to a problem that nobody is asking for a solution to. This is good for workers. People who seek out independent contracting do so because they want more autonomy. They want more flexibility in their schedule. They want to be able to dictate how much money they make in a year versus being given a solid salary. There's all kinds of benefits to workers. And those who are seeking this out aren't doing so because they can't find full-time work. They're doing it because they want the benefits of having this arrangement. And then for employers, it's a really good thing too. It is cheaper for employers to hire contract workers for many of the jobs and kinds of things that they need. I'm somebody who freelances and writes a good bit. I don't want to go work full-time at a newspaper. I like to be in the work that I'm in, but I love being able to write. The ProAct would say that newspapers couldn't hire me to write freelance. Instead, they'd have to hire me full-time, which means they'd have to pay benefits and taxes and all kinds of extra things for me. I'm not looking for that. This is a benefit, for both me and the person I hold a contract with. The people it's not good for are the people, the middlemen that are being cut out of the pie, right? It is people like unions. It is people like special interests. When it comes to the obsession with Uber and Lyft, I think there's a very clear progression and a reason for that. Uber and Lyft were hugely disruptful to a very old school, antiquated, problematic industry, which was the taxi industry. It was heavily regulated. Unions were very involved. It was a very protected industry. It was hard to break in. They kept prices artificially high. And it was really good for those few protected insiders. Who it wasn't good for was workers, consumers, and people who actually wanted to get from point A to point B without having, to jump through all kinds of crazy hurdles and deal with taxis. Uber and Lyft came in and they basically broke the model, and it's taken away some of the profits of these people who didn't want to adapt and change and grow and compete. They want to stay in their insulated industry and have government continue to guarantee that for them. And so there's a reason they target companies like Uber and Lyft, and that's ultimately because they want to destroy them.
Yes. No, you're spot on of the traditional industries that, for a long time had no competition. Taxi cab medallions, which are notoriously expensive. And I don't know, it's interesting. You think something that's funny in California is the state legislature here does not like Elon Musk. They think he takes advantage, he gets too many tax credits, you can go down this laundry list. Yet I think for California's obsession with getting to, net zero carbon emissions, getting rid of GHG, all of that, he's probably done more than any state law by pushing Tesla, by pushing electric vehicles. But it's because it's an entrepreneur. He's aggressive. He just doesn't really play well with others. They are trying to kick him out, and I think it's again one of those interesting things of he's just disrupting these traditional industries, and they don't like it. So they're like, well, even though if you're helping us, you should just go to Texas, go somewhere else. And I don't know, it's very interesting.
The blunt fact is that so often, I would say almost all of the time, regulations and these end goals that they purport to be for, clean environment or whatever the initiative is at the end that they're telling the general public about, it really comes down to protectionism, trying to shield industry insiders who are connected to government from free market competition. That really is the ultimate goal. And so when somebody is able to come in and succeed and meet the ultimate goal better than government can without those regulations, that makes them angry, right? And for good reason, because it's ultimately going to take money out of their pocket. If they aren't able to shield those donors and those protected industry insiders, that's less campaign dollars for them. And it's a vicious cycle. So I'm not surprised that they don't like Elon Musk. I think they're going to dislike anybody who proves there isn't a need for them.
Yeah, spot on. Should we talk about lobbying? Everyone's favorite boogeyman. Yes. Tell us the recent article you wrote on that.
Yeah, well, that feeds very nicely into our next subject. I often get frustrated working in politics. I've often been in roles where I'm working on policy and I'm sort of the liaison between the policy and the people. And when I encounter people, they are usually mad at the right problems, but they don't understand the root causes of those problems. And so therefore they prescribe the wrong solutions to those problems. And I think if I were to have to list out the top, 3 to 5 big picture root problems in this country, taxpayer funded lobbying would be in that list. And yet the general public has no idea it goes on. They are completely oblivious to it. Even the article that I wrote this week, you can look at my social media and I often get a ton of debate and commentary and exchange from people. And that one's just had a couple people kind of tiptoe in. There's not a whole lot of discussion going on. And I think it's just because people are like, what is this about, right? If you don't spend your days at state capitals, and I wouldn't recommend that you do, but if you don't, you're not going to see this go down. It's not widely reported on. It's not something government is trying to disclose, and it happens in so many different ways, right? It can take on a lot of forms. I think the most visible kind is when a local or state government hires a contract lobbyist to go and lobby another form of government on their behalf, right? Like that's a little bit easier to trace, but it takes on all kinds of other shapes. It could be the Commerce Board that hires a full-time lobbyist who goes and represents the Commerce Board at the state legislature, but who is often arguing for new regulations and for new licenses and things of that nature. It can take on the shape of public sector unions. We see police unions and district attorney associations spend a ton of time and money, public time and money, up at state legislatures, often arguing and lobbying against reforms that the public wants. We see that usually when this is happening, it's in favor of more government, more control, more spending. It's never really there to push back on government. You also see, corporations that get massive amounts of corporate welfare, then turn around and spend that money lobbying. You see universities and other institutions in that line that get public money that then spend a lot of money lobbying for more money. And so it's this very vicious cycle, and it's just very pervasive across the country, and it's something that directly blocks the will of the people.
It's funny you bring up those examples. California, those are magnified just because of the economic power, the size of the state. I worked in the state legislature in California for a number of years, and it's very well known, and you see it probably a couple times a year. The SEIU, these public unions, would bring in their people, and they'd have a literal lobby day. So and these are taxpayer-funded groups. These are, and they're coming in. They take a day off, and they come in. They feed hundreds of people lunch, and then they come to your assembly member or state senator's office and say, "We need whatever the talking points are." We always just thought it was funny. It's like, these are taxpayer-funded basically groups, and they're coming in. They have their own lobby day. And, private folks don't get that. They don't get a paid lobby day and a catered lunch, and they're allowed to do it, but there is a bit of crazy hypocrisy there of if a parent, someone working for a private business wanted to come in, they'd have to take time off. They're not going to be treated like, they're not going to have this organized. It's a little more grassroots. So I don't know. It's funny seeing that here because it is magnified. And there, UC's coming in wanting more money, counties wanting more money. It is, there are positions just for that, and it's like you're just coming back up saying you need to give us more money, and I'm paid to do that, and you need to do it right now. So I don't know. I guess I'm seen it and been used to it, but it is interesting that it's just twisted on its head.
Well, I like the example you give, and it makes me think of school choice. We know so many families are desperate for school choice, but they can't take a day off work, and usually multiple days off work, to go up and follow these bills around the state legislature and show up for committees and give testimony. There's no way an average person could have that flexibility or freedom to do that, but who can? The teachers unions on your dime, and they spend a significant amount of time up there working against the interests of the people. So it's a very corrupt, problematic practice. And again, I think, it's one of the top three things. And if we were to say what would meaningfully change our system and restore power to the people and give the people back their voice and really ensure that their elected representatives or they're representing them and their interests, I think prohibiting taxpayer funded lobbying would be at the top of the list.
No, it's a great point, and you're right. It does not get it's in the sun at all. So we'll be happy to share that article too, so folks get a better understanding of it as well. So maybe take us through we only have folks on, we talk about their journey, what they did at school. What did you study when you were at college, and where did you go?
Yeah, I went to Belmont University, which is a school in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a private school, but it's a very big music college. It's actually right at the end of Music Row in Nashville. And it has a pretty storied history. It's had a lot of successful country music artists come out of there, like Brad Paisley went there, and I think Amy Grant went there, and more recently, like Florida Georgia Line came out of there. So I mean, a lot of artists that have come out of there, and a lot of industry insiders. So it's a very beautiful campus. It's a very expensive school. I wouldn't recommend anybody go to. I'm a victim of our very problematic higher education bubble, which I've actually done an episode of my podcast on, because I think it's something people need to be more aware of, and I've tried to kind of share that experience. And so, you know, it's easy to look back in hindsight and say, like, I would have done this or this.
Sure.
I was a kid that just loved music, and it was all I ever wanted to do. It was all I really knew. And I knew I wanted to go to Nashville from the time I was a little kid. I was enamored with it. And so for me, it was like, well, there's Vanderbilt, and I don't know why I would go to Vanderbilt. And then there's Belmont, this music school. So I'll go there. And they did have a very unique program where I got a degree in music business. So I actually got a business degree, a BBA. It just honed in on the music industry. And so in addition to normal classes, I took things like, you know, contract law or artist management or public relations. And so if you were somebody who was going to stay in the music industry, it made sure you really had a better understanding of the kinds of agreements and contracts you might encounter, and just sort of, you know, how royalties work and all of that kind of stuff. So very interesting career path. It really didn't feel like a normal college experience. It was very professional. Like I mentioned, I was doing pretty high profile internships and gigs even in school. But it was cool. You know, I was coordinating the Grammys red carpet when I was like a junior in college. So it was some very surreal type experiences. And as a whole, I am grateful that I got to get it out of my system and give it a shot. And I never have to look back and say, like, what if I tried? You know, I did try, got to see it, been there, done that, and thankful I was able to move out of it too.
My only two comments were Florida Georgia Line is probably my favorite country band.
Really?
And yeah, randomly, like when every time they come out here, we go. And your point on school debt and student loans, I would advise everyone to go to another Tennessean and look at Dave Ramsey's thoughts on doing student debt and student loans, because you're spot on. And that's we could do a whole nother episode on student loan debt, I'm sure. So.
Absolutely.
Well, one of our last things, maybe take us through, if someone's interested in doing what you do or wants to do music, what advice would you give folks that are just maybe, you know, they're in high school, they're in college, they're looking to do public policy, they're interested in a topic. What do they do? How do they get more involved? How do they make a career out of it?
Yeah, you know, I often do get those questions. And I think the best piece of advice I have is one that I got in school. And it's that if you want to be doing something, you'll be doing it, right? We would often have people come in and say, I want to be an artist. And we'd say, well, where are you performing? Or they'd say, I want to be an artist manager. And we'd say, well, who are you managing, right? If you really want to be doing these things, people who are driven, people who are ambitious, just start doing them. Just go out and start doing it. And so I think, you know, that's what I've done throughout my career, even when I wanted to transition before I necessarily had full-time job offers. When I wanted to do something, I started doing it, and I tried to improve and get better at doing it. And usually in that process, then the job offers would follow. And I think that that's true in just about any sector or field that you're interested in. You know, just start meeting people, start making relationships, start networking, start building your brand, and start producing the kinds of things that you ultimately want to be paid to do full time.
Great advice. It's almost too simple that I worry people won't do it, but it is. Sometimes you just got to get there and start doing it, and
just do it.
All and keep moving forward. So I love that.
Absolutely.
So we'll close out here. Where can folks find your work, read your articles, follow you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, they can follow my writing at fee.org and many other great writers as well. My Twitter is at Hannah Cox 7. I have a public Facebook that's at Hannah Danielle Cox 7. So those are great ways to get plugged in. I also have a Substack that's hannahcox.substack. So they can follow all of my work there too. Would love to connect with people. Oh, and my podcast is based with Hannah Cox, and it's on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and Facebook.
Great. Well, we'll share that with our audience. Make sure they have it. But thanks for coming on. Great different topics, and just great to learn about your story. Is very fascinating. So thank you, Hannah.
Thanks so much for having me.